Isaiah chapter 61. Isaiah chapter 61. Let's look at it. Did your fingers get tired this morning? Isaiah chapter 61. And he says, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord hath anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He hath sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord, and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all the mourning." Christ then makes it his own in this, and he goes on and he speaks to this topic that is before us. And so let's look number 2. Let no man think that there is let no man think that there is any gospel of deliverance or helplessness for him, except as it is grounded in the cure of whatever evil there may be in him, evil habits, selfish aims, and worldly spirit. Number 2, it's philosophy. Number 2, it's philosophy. Suppose some questioner had arisen in the synagogue that day of Nazareth and asked Jesus, not as to the substance of his preaching, for that was plain enough, but what was the ground of it? On what ultimate fact or reason does it rest that you preach this message? I think the answer would have been this sort. I am making in this gospel a revelation of God, showing his very heart. This is what God feels for you. This is how he loves and pities you. This is what God proposes to do for you, to cheer you with good news and open your blind eyes and free you, your bruised soul and the body, from the captivity of evil. Israel was in the midst of the Roman captivity. They were in captivity. Though in that time, as I'm learning, there were some free, the Romans kind of let them alone to be their own rulers. They could do a lot of things freedom. The Romans left them alone as long as they did not go against the Roman government. But yet they still were in captivity. And Jesus was saying, I have come to set you free. They misunderstood that, of course. Notice, thirdly, its power. Its power. The Spirit of the Lord was upon me. In one sense, its power lay in its substance. Another in the philosophy or ground of it. But there was more than comes from those two. There was the power that resided in him who spoke this truth. In what lay the commanding power? The words that he spoke were not previous words. They were not words of eloquence. These were not words that fancy. The words lay directly to the heart of what they were saying. Not in any impressive manner, not in quantity of presentation, There was an element of power, but they did not constitute the power. The main element of the power was not in the words. In the words he spoke, but not the power was not in how he spoke the word, but the subject of his words. Here we have the key to the power with which Christ preached. He saw the meaning of the Jewish system. He knew what the acceptable year of the Lord meant. And he pierced the whole symbolism to its core and drew out its significance. He's going to point out exactly what was going on in that assembly that day. He's going to point out that they were in the same boat and doing the same thing that they did in Elijah's day. And that's what will get him thrown out of the synagogue. He saw that God was a deliverer from first to last. The whole heart and mind of God was open to him. He saw that, Jesus did. And this was the power of his preaching. He knew the mind of God. He saw God. He understood God. He knew what God had done and would do. The whole purpose and plan of deliverance and the redemption lay before him as an open page. He knew what he came to do. He understood what he was about to say to those people. He had full knowledge of knowing that God was going to do exactly what he said he was going to do and could do and deliver them. Sometimes we as preachers preach and we say a whole lot of things and we're hoping that it works. The fact of the matter is, when Jesus spoke that day, he had the mind of God, and he knew when he spoke that God would do exactly what he wanted to do, and he knew when he spoke that day that he was going to go on the cross and accomplish the purpose of God. We cannot measure this knowledge of Christ. We can only faintly conceive. But the measure of our conception of it, the power lays in the concept that God was going to do through Jesus Christ. So Jesus goes to Nazareth. And what he does, if I can get back to where I want to start at. He comes now to verse 20, after he spoke that, and he closed the book. And he gave it again to the minister, and sat down, and the eyes of all them that were in the synagogue were fastened on him. Now, I do realize it is what is in front of the text. What is in front of the text, if I might say. Here is Luke 4:20. In front of the text. This is the front of the text. And this is what's ahead of the text. So often, what we do is we preach what's behind the text rather than the text and what's ahead of the text.
Right.
What is the text saying? I realize, but I cannot resist to give you some information to lay the groundwork for this passage. Notice it says, in the King James, it says that the keeper of the book says, the King James says minister, and the book. that the minister gave Jesus to read. And I was looking at that, and I said, in the first place, I don't know why they interpreted the word book. It wasn't a book. They didn't have books. It was a scroll. And secondly is he wasn't a minister in the terms that we understand a minister. If it had been a book, Jesus would not have shut it. Rather, he would have rolled it up. And so as I was researching this, after the reading from the Pentateuch, which they did, the reader would choose a section from the prophets and follow the reading in Hebrew. A translation would be made in Aramaic, the tongue of the first century Palestine. But when Jesus finished reading, he stood at the lectern and he read what the keeper of the book gave him, and he read it, and then he went over and he sat down. That's a good idea. He sat down. And went, because I can see my notes over here. And when he sat down in a position that they knew that he was about to say something after he sat down. He was in a position where they knew that now he's sitting down. They looked at him and all eyes were gazed on him to wonder what he was going to say. Yeah, every eye was gazed on him. Every eyes were gazed on the... Are you gazing? Are you with intent of listening? Lois, pay attention to me. What is he going to say? Jesus... I know what's going on when I'm preaching. I wish I was blind sometimes. So he sat down, and they knew he was about ready to say something, and because they knew his fame, they knew who he was, and they were anxious to hear what he had to say. So the keeper of the book, the keeper of the scroll, took it, put it back in a case for the next week. And all eyes were on Jesus. And the Greek name means that he rendered, let me go back, and what I'm saying is that the minister, when I first read it, when you first read the minister, I thought he was a minister of the congregation, but where he was, what was he? He was second. He was not the president of the synagogue, but was in charge of keeping the office. And Jesus sat down, the customary position for teaching. And when he sat down, it was a sign that he was going to speak instead of going back to the desk. And the eyes were on him. They were fastened on him. The word means they were riveted on him. Intense, like all of you. You're intense on wondering what I'm going to say next or what I'm going to read next. All the eyes in the synagogue were gazed, fixed upon Jesus, fastened. And not only that, their bodies were leaning forward. They were stretched to see with intent what he was about to say. And Paul says he used the term of a steady, eager gaze of the people. Jesus, here in Luke, Jesus had held the people spellbound for a moment. And Jesus quotes from memory the Greek verse, and he inserts, for instance, one clause which cannot found anywhere in Isaiah, but in another part of the same prophet. Having read, standing, as was the usage, and they all were standing, Back in those days when you read, you stood up. And Jesus resumed his seat and not as having not finished. And then his very first sentence